Welcome back to Heads and Tails. This is Opident Education's podcast. This is episode 2. We are delighted to have Emilie Spire on. Emilie is the founder of Noala, a business set up in 2021 that focuses on developmental language disorders. It's reported that an estimated 20% of people will experience some sort of communication difficulty during their life. And currently in the UK, 2 students in every class of 30 have a disorder. It is said that 81% with emotional and behavioral disorders have unidentified communication needs. We are delighted to have you on our podcast to hear your stories. There will be families, there will be children, there will be teachers out there. I know very keen to hear all about this up and coming business that you have kindly set up. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Walter. Thanks so much for welcoming us and Noala. It's a very important topic very important problem that we're trying to solve here.
Wonderful. Before we get onto the story of the business, it is, I think, important to hear you and your story and perhaps your upbringing. We're a mentoring business. Tell us a bit about your childhood and whether you had any mentors growing up yourself.
So it's a very interesting question. And as a child, so I'm the seventh of a family of 7 siblings. So I have 6 bigger brothers and sisters. I don't know if you can consider sisters and brothers mentors, but definitely impact my childhood and pushes me to basically try to catch up with them. Growing up then, I've been very fortunate being a student in the business school, and then through my first experience to meet people along the way, either founder like Nicolas Bosson, the founder of BlaBlaCar, or investor like Federico Antoine Selvo at Fixed Capital, who beyond just managing me, really took it to their heart to mentor by providing genuine feedback and always being responsive when asking questions. And the team actually now at night is making fun of me, but when I started the business, I start saying around me that it takes a village to build a company. And actually that village that we build around Noala is composed by those first mentors, those people that have been here, when I knew nothing about nothing, still really tell, and there is not one day, to be honest, when I don't ask a question to someone who is more expert than me. And that mentorship really, I think, can support you in your development and can help you fast track, very much so.
Completely. And I know you say often that Noala is not about you, but let me hear the kind of story behind how it started. What was the reason you started the company?
So Noala, we are a platform that enable easy access to speech and language therapy. I'm not a speech and language therapist. I haven't done a medical school. My background is more in the digital space, building, advising, or investing in marketplace. So how on earth I ended up spending all my time, energy, and sweat building that platform? It came from a personal story. So one of my niece, she suffered from a stroke just before she was born, meaning that the left side of her brain was impaired and she had lots of delay, including communication delays. And I could see my sister, one, struggling to access speech and language therapy because there is not enough speech and language therapy out there. The waiting lists are super long. And once you finally get access to it, it's very inconvenient. You have to go back and forth to the hospital at a specific time of the day, of the week, in a specific location. And then in between the sessions, similar to PT or physiotherapy, you need to practice, but same, you're a bit lost. Maybe you've been given a leaflet, most of the time black and white, and you try to practice with a child while doing everything else in your life. And coming from being in my digital world, I think it must be an easier way to enable access. And why I think it's important to put our effort on that is because starting to dig into the topic and starting to read more about speech and language therapy and talking also to one of my friends I get with a speech and language therapist, I realized how powerful speech and language therapy can be. I mean, I'm going to state the obvious, but if someone is able to communicate clearly, then they can make a friend, then they can express their feeling, then they can chat with their mentor, for instance. And so I could see it also firsthand with my niece when she started to communicate in her own way, suddenly the personality flourished. So enabling that access and providing access to speech language therapy in an easier way really increase and improve the well-being of people who have communication disorder.
Do you measure that causation between solving language disorder and the well-being of that child? Is that impact piece? I mean, it's a fairly recent business. It's been going just over a year, I think.
Indeed. So it's beyond Noala. So there has been research paper being published on that topic. We display some of them on our website. To give you just a stat that's usually quite striking, 80% of kids with behavioral disorder have underdiagnosed communication disorder. So again, stating the obvious, and for the mom, maybe your parents in the audience, or even school teacher in the audience, you've noticed sometimes that the kids that throw the most tantrum are usually the ones who struggle to express themselves. And as soon as they start to say the first word, the first sentences, the number of tantrum decrease. This is anecdotal, but this is also backed by research and proven by data. So yes, indeed, improving your communication skills, improve your mental health and well-being.
It's as much a problem I see as an unsolved delivery. For example, as a child, I had a speech impediment, and the mechanics to solve it were fairly old school. I mean, I had to try and blow a feather off the table. And as soon as the feather would blow off the table, they thought my speech impediment had been cured. I still speak with a lisp, much to my wife's humor. But there was definitely, even as a young boy, innate insecurities about my speech impediment. So I suppose my question is, what are the implications to a child if those language disorders aren't solved? What do you think the implications are, both in the short term and then perhaps the long term too?
Absolutely, from what we observe, and again, when I say we, it's the community of speech language therapists using Noala and supporting us, definitely it impacts the confidence of the child, and sharing your journey is so powerful. You've lived through that, so you know. But beyond that, for instance, there is also this stat showing that children who suffer from communication disorder have 4 times less likely to succeed at GCSE in math and English. And we all know that from there, then you can link to the employment rate, then you can link to, integration in society, et cetera, et cetera. So the stat shows that it potentially impact academic result, it potentially impact confidence, and all the other aspects of the life of a child.
Wow. The causation I'm fascinated by between what you're doing and attainment. Mentoring, we always say is a focus on character-led skills with the indirect cause of improving a child's grades. Now, you just made a statistical point around that. Is an increase in attainment all the way up to A level something that you focus on in the,
Based on the research, speech and language therapists accessing to this kind of program has a direct impact on performance and can increase the chances. Obviously, we're in the medical domain, there is no guarantee result, but the chances are definitely increased when you have access to these kind of services.
Mm-hmm. So can I just dig deeper into the actual delivery of this? So you're a professional, you're the professional giving me the support. What is the professional doing in a session? Just take us inside a session.
So we use a lot the PCI approach. So parent coaching will basically, the professional give the tools to the parent, to the care, to support the communication on a daily basis. So you're gonna have a weekly checkup. First, you start with an assessment, ideally. Then following that assessment, you start your program. A program is on average 6 weeks. Every week you have a checkup with a professional that reviews the exercise that you've done the week before, digital exercise, and will guide you, giving you tailored advice on the tips and tricks on how you can also, use, for instance, the bus time or the commute time or the park time to foster the communication of your child beyond the exercise. So as a parent, every day you have now a coaching video with tips and tricks, a flashcard, digital keywords, digital matching pair that have been clinically backed So by using those on the laptop, the tablet with your child a bit every day, depending on how much time you have, we know that parents are sometimes super busy, so it can be just 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, but you practice a bit with this platform every day. So it's like your own therapist in your pocket. And then after a week of practice, you have this online video call with a professional that can review your progress and adapt the rest of the program to your need and give you that extra piece of advice. It's a bit like, again, think about a PT. If you ever turn your uncle, we know that obviously you're gonna see your PT regularly, and that forces you to make some progress and to do some exercise with him. But the more you're gonna practice in between, the better and the faster the recovery. So it's exactly the same with our communication program.
A therapist in your pocket. It's a long way from Lionel Logue working with the King in one of my favorite films, The King's Speech, which if anyone hasn't watched it, please do. I think he had some pretty outdated models of solving this kind of thing, but apparently it worked. So you are the education secretary, and you are given a carte blanche to change the way that children learn in schools. What would you do differently? What would you bring in? What would you change to the, call it UK education system based on what you've seen?
It's a big task. So I would listen closely to the teacher first to hear from them what's the real feeling, on the field. And then from my very, very limited experience with nieces and nephews, and, I haven't been in the class, so just seeing also mentoring now younger people as well on my spare time, given the pace at which we evolve, and even if you think about, how what we're doing at Noala would have been impossible 5 or 10 years ago, and who knows what we're gonna do in 5 or 10 years. It's all about, I believe, learning to learn, having actually educating the French system, so different from the UK system. And back then, when I was not so long ago, but when I studied 20, 30 years ago, it was all about memorizing, which is great, but what about the logic? Because if I memorize something that doesn't exist 10 years from now, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly how, and I would try to listen a lot to speak to, I would try to listen a lot to teachers, but basically learning to learn and learning to ask questions and to find those mentors to whom you can brainstorm and have sounding board along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And communicating would be basically the key.
Yeah, I think that Socratic model of learning is, well, I know, so championed by people in this field, and the learning to learn, the inquisition, the deliberate kind of reflection of that kind of method, I know is championed by really good teachers that we've seen in our work with schools.
Exactly. I actually would be curious, because what you see at Opitan, like, what best than a mentor to ask a question? How do you learn to have a mentor? Is it something that you could do?
Yeah, I mean, God, it's funny, mentoring sits in this in the Venn diagram between counseling, therapy, teaching, tuition, coaching, and it takes certain elements from each one. So it's kind of hard to define exactly what a mentor does, but I think the best quality that a mentor can do is to ask a child to reflect. A 9-year-old rarely reflects on his or her day at school, on their wider tasks, on their wider goals that they're trying to achieve. And it's one of the elements of a research model we use with the Oxford Character Project, which are sort of the seminal leaders of this kind of education. And so reflection is one, and yes, accountability is the other. Role modeling is the other one. I think people learn from people who they respect. So bringing all these elements together, this model that we have and the kind of work that you do, I think, is hopefully an exciting proposition for the future. Stepping back from education, we might touch on Noala again towards the end of this podcast. We have about 5 minutes left. You didn't start in education. I know you worked for a VC and a private equity firm in France, and I think you moved to London to work for Felix Capital, if that's right. Mm-hmm. We have a number of young professionals who are moving out of finance and moving into education. Can I ask your experience of that and what you've learned from that change?
Absolutely. And so to have the full journey, I started as a consultant in finance, as I studied in a business school, then move on to the investment side in this firm called Partech, then to a startup called BlaBlaCar for 2 years, and then to London at FedEx 5 years ago as an investor. So I did this kind of ping pong, operational, investor, operational. I think, again, it's all about being willing to learn, especially in the tech digital ecosystem, being willing to use data, being analytical. Which, for instance, when you come from the finance background, usually one of your core skills is being analytical. So being able to play with data, to answer some questions, some business questions, that's very much transferable skills. And then being willing to learn, the agile method, being willing to learn how do you build a product, and asking questions to software engineer, asking questions to designer, asking questions to marketer, always with that data mindset.
You've just gone through a very successful raise. I think you raised about 3.5 million. For any burgeoning young founders out there, can you take us through a funding round? Your feelings, I imagine, has been like a roller coaster raising money. What are your tips? Can I ask you your tips on raising money?
I don't know if I have any tips. It's definitely not an easy task. Brace yourself. Get ready to hear no a lot. But if you have conviction, continue to build on that conviction. And what we've seen from our experience is that find people who are very much aligned with your mission. We're very fortunate to be backed by investors who genuinely believe in the mission and in the importance of enabling access to speech language therapy. And it's all about building those relationships in a meaningful way. If that makes sense. Being open to challenge. Your investor at the end of the day are aligned with you, they're in the same boat. So if they ask you a question, it can be only basically to improve the business. So when I was pitching, I remember sometimes I didn't have the answer to all the questions. And that's completely fine, as long as I think you're, especially at an early stage, but as long as you're willing to learn and to improve, and the cycle of learning is short, basically, so that you can always, incrementally, you compound basically improvement every week. That makes sense.
It does, compounding improvement every week. Is that the same philosophy you use in your team internally? I think you're about 10 or 15 in the office now.
Indeed, we do weekly recap, and we're trying to extract learning every week and course correct every week.
Wonderful. That's definitely an office I'd like to be part of. And then, I mean, without sounding too cliche, what's the future for Noala? Where do you want to get to? What's the aim for a business that is doing such good things as yours?
The aim is very much to impact positively the life of millions of families and children. We are now in the hundreds, so obviously it's still very much early days, but we keep our heads down and continue to build a product and a platform that improve and facilitate access so that we can impact families in the UK, in the US as well. We're starting to have our first families there, although it's softly launched. And yeah, continuing listening to our users and try to reply to their needs, basically.
Wonderful. Well, I think giving a voice to children who are in need is God's work. I have been following you closely since your launch. Will continue to follow you closely. For anyone who hasn't heard of Emilie or Noala, they are going places that we could only dream of. So Emilie, thank you for coming on Heads and Tails. It's been wonderful to talk to you, to meet you properly, to hear your story, to hear your advice as a manager, as a founder, as someone who has suffered family issues that has enabled you to start a business that is doing such good things. So thank you very much for being on our podcast.
Thanks so much, Walter. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye.